Well, if there's sources that are coming out and saying this, they're credible sources. The West Midlands Police take on this sort of action very, very seriously, and unless there's a particular competent source that they're aware of, they wouldn't have done this. So obviously there's a clear source who said this, and therefore I think people are looking to copycat what's happened before and will perhaps attempt something like this.
Thing is, the police have to be out and about, and so they represent a fairly soft target to a self-starting terrorist of some kind.
Oh, very much so, and I think this is why it's important that they wear all the protective gear that they're entitled to wear. They should be wearing that. And I think more importantly, rather than travelling on their own, they should be at least in pairs. I believe that's what's happening in Birmingham at the moment. But it is a very, very vulnerable target for people to have a look at, but we need to be aware of what's happening and how the community can ensure that they support this.
Telling them not to use public transport to go home, I mean, that's quite a difficult thing for a lot of people.
Well, it is, because most people don't get into a car or drive a bicycle, but they keep the uniform on in most instances. You just put a coat over the top of it. So I suppose they will have to take their uniforms off when they're travelling back home at least, and to perhaps trying to deter some of those things happening to them.
How successful in Birmingham have the police been in getting an integrated force?
Not as successful as they should be, but they've done well. They've done better than most West Midlands police force has done much better than most other authorities. We need to go a long way still to do a lot more. And I think that should be something that we need to look at. But it's a difficult climate at the moment for police forces to do that, because they're cutting their numbers. And as the government's already said, they're cutting another 30,000 across the country after the next election. So that would make it even more difficult. Today we've been in Parliament addressing the terrorism bill. But we can do all of those things once we have the proper resources for police and the intelligence and the other services that we've got.
I mean, do you think the reductions in the budget, we've also seen today the Metropolitan Police selling New Scotland Yard, that famous building, are both reducing the effectiveness of the police and also putting them in greater danger? Perhaps?
I think certainly both of those. Certainly the effectiveness, I've seen that in my constituency. Some crimes are rising and we need to stop that, and that used to happen with the numbers that we've had. And to reduce that even further will certainly have a detrimental effect to policing in all of our communities.
Because, of course, the impact of some of these guidelines, don't wear your uniform when you're not on duty, don't travel on public transport, is going to mean that the separation between the police and the public is going to be all the greater, that we're not going to have that present.
Well, that's what we had previously with the army when that happened, and only recently the advice was to go back into uniform. But I think what we've got to do is we need to get this awareness across to the whole of the community, and we need to get community support for the police as well. And like you said, getting better integrated police forces are much better for the whole of the community.
If this continues, will the police have to really, I mean, you said, for example, always wear your stab vest and the rest of it, but if this continues, are the police going to have to really look again at the way they work, for example, patrolling on the streets?
I think yes. I think that will ultimately, if it continues. But I think what we've got to do is address the whole issue of radicalisation. And I think, unfortunately, over the last 4.5 years or so, we've taken our eye off the ball as a government and as a country. And we need to get back to that, particularly with what's going on with ISIL across in Iraq and Syria. And we need to look at this threat. We need to look at how we de-radicalise some of those young people. And that's a real serious issue for us to deal with.
Khalid Mahmood, thank you very much indeed for joining us.